Agreed upon.
Okay.
Oh, Maureen, you're gonna crack me up tonight. I like that.
Yeah, I'm a freelance historian. I'm not affiliated to any organisation.
You know, I would have, because I've tried to get a good friend of mine, who is a very popular Sierra Leonean journalist. You may have heard of him. He's called Surios Samura. I tried to get him so that he can join the Zoom, but he's busy writing a book. So I was on the phone with him to say I want him to be part of this discussion. And there's another guy called Patrice. Patrice is an actor, but also fascinated again about Sierra Leonean history and how history is being told. So even while we're talking, I'm still going to be trying to get them to say, come on and join, okay? So
feedback will be good afterwards as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Right.
If my guests have finished nattering to each other for 5 seconds, can I welcome the world once more to the World Storytelling Cafe, wherever you are and whoever you are. And tonight we are delving into, well, we're not quite sure whether history is a story or story is a history. So and neither are my guests. But Maureen, I think Maureen James, Dr. Maureen James, even is she takes facts and mixes them up in a pot. And then regurgitate. No, that sounds really nasty. And then turns them into the most magnificent story. And then Yusuf, who we know is a regular on World Storytelling Cafe, but we're looking at East Anglia, and it was something that came up the other day in the cafe, and I just thought, well, that'd just make a good program. East Anglia and its links to the abolitionists, and then and so I got hold of Maureen, and she, you know, when storytellers get together, you know, we get, as useful will know, you know, 3 hours later we get off the phone, and so there was this whole links to Sierra Leone. So I think, well, you know, there's that'll bring it useful nicely. So I'm now going to hand over to Maureen James, who will quite how she's going to weave East Anglia, abolition, and Sierra Leone in together and into a succinct little lump of story. I haven't the faintest idea, but the challenge, it's over to you, Maureen.
How long have I got?
Well, we'd like to let you in sometime in the next hour. Would be great.
Well, I'll try and be succinct. But you wanted me to start with Olaudah Equiano.
Absolutely.
No,
I'll tell you why. Because, you know, when, I mean, we had this discussion between both of you, that when people talk about abolitionists, they always go on about well, they usually talk about Wilberforce, which, you know, it's a bit like talking about Churchill, either hero or villain, depending on Cromwell, depending on who you are. But people tend to talk about the white abolitionists, and as an afterthought, they say, of course, there were black abolitionists as well, you know. And so I thought, you know, let's start with the black geezer. You know, it just seems like, you know, that's polite, isn't it? And chronologically, as far as East Anglia are concerned, it works. So I'm going to go back to you, Maureen.
Yeah. So I need to go back to 1745, to the birth of Olaudah Equiano, who was known to all his friends as Gustavus Vasa. And it's only when he produced his book, The Interesting Narrative, that people found that, you know, what his real African name was, except that he declared later in the civil records for his baptism and also for his service within the military that he was born in Carolina. But I think the description of Africa in his Interesting Narrative is very, very detailed and kind of contains thoughts and feelings. So even if it might have been based on somebody else's account, we'll kind of take it that he may well have been born in Africa. Wherever he was born, he ended up as a young enslaved person in London, where he received an education from these two sisters of the naval captain who he was owned by. And so, you know, he studied well and then went out on, had lots of adventures. He was bought and sold 10 times in his young adult life before eventually he settled in London. He spent time also as a hairdresser. He travelled to not just the Caribbean, where he did have a go at being involved in enslaving and running a plantation, but didn't like it, didn't like the atmosphere of it. He tried to purchase people from his own tribe and look after them well, but the whole thing was not to his liking. So back to England. He spent time in the Royal Navy, went to the Arctic as well. So quite a colourful life before he came back to Britain and heard about, firstly, a friend of his that had been enslaved. They had been in this country but were taken out and sold again against their will, and he knew that was against the judgment of Justice Mansfield, and he knew that an abolitionist called Granville Sharp was involved with this. So he called on Granville Sharp and asked for help. They couldn't actually help this man, John Annis, who was shipped over to the Caribbean and died not long afterwards. But this established a friendship, a relationship between Equiano and Granville Sharp that meant that I think he was welcomed into Granville's house whenever he wanted to pop round. He was the one that informed Granville about the Zong Incident of 1783, where the captain, I think many people know about that incident, where a slave captain threw the 132 enslaved Africans overboard because he said they're running out of water, which was not actually the case. They found out because the insurance didn't want to pay out. So this case went to court, but the people were judged to be as same as if they were horses, they were cargo. So there was quite a lot of bad feeling about this, and people feeling very uncomfortable in this country, including obviously Equiano, that his countrymen would be thought of as cargo. But alongside this, we have the situation in America of them wanting their independence. So they were fighting away, and part of the British strategy was to offer any slaves or any of the enslaved that could get themselves over to the British side, which at the time in 1775 was Chesapeake Bay. There was a ship there that was Lord Dunmore's floating government in exile. If they could get themselves there, they could claim their freedom. So thousands of formerly sort of slaves got themselves, they dog paddled, so the saying goes, they rowed, they got there any which way onto this boat and asked for their freedom. Some of them actually fought alongside the British, but all of them were claiming kind of sanctuary. And so we ended up with, when the Americans won their independence, big problem of a whole load of black people stuck in New York wanting to get away, not wanting to go back to their former owners. So it was decided by the British government to either take them to Jamaica, to Nova Scotia, or to London. And I think it would be a bit, personally, I would think that the reason not many chose to go to Jamaica is it's a bit dodgy going down there. You were likely to be enslaved again. Quite a lot went up to Nova Scotia, but there they found the climate was pretty cold. They didn't settle down well. And also they were given their freedom. So that meant that even though they were promised they could have some land, it wasn't a high priority. So they got to Nova Scotia, maybe given a bit of land, but they'd have to clear the forest first before they could grow anything. And the weather was pretty cold. The others went to London. And as we know, London streets are not paved with gold. So they got there, found obviously no land to be given to anyone in London. It's always been in very short supply. So they were wandering the streets, hundreds of black people. And Equiano was in London to see this. And he got involved with the project to for the relief of the black poor on the streets of London. 1786 this was, and they managed to raise this project. He wasn't on the committee as far as I'm aware, but they had lots of fundraisers. They raised £900 just in a couple of months for the relief of the black poor, because you had donations from William Pitt, the Prime Minister, the Duchess of Devonshire, and so on. It was quite the thing to be giving to. And then a man came up with a scheme, Henry Smeathman, a botanist. He said that he'd just come back from Sierra Leone. Wonderful place, he said, marvelous weather, perfect for growing anything and everything you want. This would be the perfect project to get the black people down there, to get them to work the land and send the produce back to London, thereby covering the costs of the journey. And the Treasury agreed to give £14 for each black person that would agree to go to Africa. The Committee for the Black Poor agreed to administer it, and handbills were distributed, and everyone was merrily sort of working towards this aim, except they didn't actually ask the black people on the streets of London whether they would be interested in this project. And the black people on the streets of London may well have been reading the papers. And the newspapers were full of, well, including Ottobah Kugano, what's his name, John Stewart, a black writer at the time, friend of Olaudah Equiano. He commented that where they were planning to settle these black people in Sierra Leone was very close to the slave trading forts and so on. So yeah, he commented, isn't this a bit dodgy to take them down there where slave trading is absolutely rife? And I'm sure the people who were, if they'd been asked about the project, would have said, I don't think we want to go. It's not a good area to go to. Alongside this, there was the problem of the convicts, because Britain could no longer send the convicts to the Americas because it was now independent. So they decided to send them down to Botany Bay in Australia and found a colony there. And this was in the papers, often running just alongside this project for Sierra Leone. And the project for Sierra Leone also had plans, those plans for Sierra Leone River to set up a convict colony on the island of Tazo. I'm not sure if I pronounced these names correctly. So people would read this confusing pot of information of Botany Bay, Commander Phillips. There was even a report that he was going to stop at Africa on the way down to Botany Bay, drop some people off there. Well, if you were a black person thinking about going on the ship to Africa and you heard that Commander Phillips, the soon-to-be governor of Botany Bay, was actually going to be commanding the fleet, you'd probably be a bit reluctant to get on a ship, as they were. And so the government were told quite strongly they needed to stop the fear-mongering, which, you know, quite reminiscent of what's been going on of late. Anyway, but the government hired, got the Navy to put up three or four ships, including the King's ship, the Nautilus, and they were going to prepare these for taking about 700 African people, they predicted, and they appointed Olaudah Equiano to get the stores together for this. And by the time he was appointed, Henry Smeathman, who was going to go on this voyage, he passed away. You know, it was a time of lots of illness and so on. As had the chairman of the Committee for the Black Poor. They had a new chairman, they had a new, needed a new project manager, effectively, a new superintendent, and they appointed Smeathman's friend and clerk, Joseph Irwin. But Irwin instantly didn't get on with Laudo Equiano. So they were sort of at each other's throats, and Equiano pointed out discrepancies within the accounts for the journey. And so he was dismissed from the project, but not before he'd written out some beautiful lists of the people that were intending to go. And actually, indeed, the people that did go on the journey. So we know from him that of 700 that applied initially, only 441 actually went on the ships down to Sierra Leone under the command of Captain Thompson. And they set off and they arrived, as Thompson predicted, and not at all ideally, just at the start of the rainy season, which is absolutely hopeless for trying to set up your accommodation. Also, when they arrived, one of their ships dropped them off and went off and picked up a few African people to sell in the Caribbean. Actually, it had a mutiny, and I would like to think that that was connected to the fact that the initial voyage was not about slave trading. And the crew thought, we're not happy with this. But the ship itself, the Belisarius, ended up being disbanded or broken up in the Caribbean. But possibly 25 Africans were taken to that area. Anyway, so we had this project that initially had massive problems with building the houses and so on. The seeds wouldn't grow. Irwin died of the fever, as did many of the other settlers. So it was a bit crazy. But Captain Thompson, bless him, he stayed on till September. They'd left in the spring, and he made sure that they were settled before he went. He'd negotiated land and came back to England and said they need more supplies, and they happily did this. They supplied extra bits, which helped tremendously. But meanwhile, those in Nova Scotia were getting a bit fed up with the weather. They were fed up with not being given land. And they elected one of their number, a man called Thomas Peters, who was a black pioneer. He'd fought for the British. He was elected to come to London in 1790 to petition the government to allow the Nova Scotians, as they called themselves, to go down to Africa to join this project that was ongoing down there. And the British in London, they thought that's a brilliant idea, because unbeknownst to the people in Nova Scotia, probably, the actual colony had been sacked by King Jimmy and burnt to the ground. The people there had scattered, they'd gone up into the hills or wherever. So it actually needed re-kicking off. So they picked up on this idea. And at that time, we had Thomas Clarkson, the abolitionist, born in Wisbech, and his brother John, 6 years younger than him, relatively young man of age 30 and age 26 at the time Peters arrived. They were instantly interested in the project. So Thomas Clarkson got involved in the administration in Britain, and also of writing a report on how the project, this attempt number 2 to settle Sierra Leone with freed African people, or as the Nova Scotians called themselves, that they considered themselves Nova Scotians. A lot of them hadn't actually been born in Africa. They were born in the Americas. So this was about settling them in Africa, subtext of converting them to Christianity, and other subtext to try and get trade back and forth between Britain and Africa, rather than in enslaved people. So Thomas was asked to prepare a report, because he'd prepared one for his his master's degree at Cambridge before he'd gone on. He was meant to be a clergyman, but he dropped that idea when he became completely addicted to helping the abolition cause. But he'd written this report on "Don't enslave Africans, let's trade with them." So he was asked to write a proper report for the company, for the Sierra Leone project, the Sierra Leone Company. Well, I would think that's a bit dodgy. Surely you'd be better off hiring an economist or an agriculturalist rather than somebody who just cares about abolition. But he wrote this report, and it has been heavily criticised by historians of late. So I'm putting in a good word for Thomas. He was asked to do it. He delivered it. But, you know, rather than saying, I don't think I'm adequately qualified here. But his brother John, who joined the Royal Navy, but had discovered through the wars that he didn't like war, he volunteered to actually take ships over to Nova Scotia to escort these black people, these Nova Scotians, down to Sierra Leone. So he set off after having a photo taken in his full uniform with his the bill for the establishment of the Sierra Leone Company in his hand. You know, a nice thing to leave his fiancée. His young fiancée was staying behind, but he said he'd see her relatively soon. It was just a voyage, just to Nova Scotia, then down to Africa, be back soon. So he set off on the journey, made an instant impression with the people in Nova Scotia, and persuaded 1,190 of them that going to Africa would be a good thing. He read through the paperwork that had been given him by the Sierra Leone Company, misinterpreted the bit about paying rent, because they were very anti-paying rent. But he said, no, that will be a charge for education and costs and so on. So, yeah, he also prepared the ships for travel, and they had 15 ships. And he had probably known about these earlier projects, almost certainly, I would think. So he ensured that all these ships, the 15 ships, were all rejigged, so they bore no resemblance at all to slave ships. Thoroughly cleaned. The decks were, well, the cabin sort of air sleeping areas, the roofs were made higher, so you had 5 foot headroom, or not headroom, 5 foot up, so people didn't feel they were being put into a slave ship. He also made sure they knew what food they were getting and so on. So thorough job of getting this voyage ready. And they set off in January of 1792. John was on the hospital ship, which was perhaps a good thing, because he, having done all this hard work, he took ill quite quickly from once they'd set off. It was actually pronounced dead, stitched up in the canvas for burial at sea, but just when they'd done that, they noticed he seemed to be moving. So you can actually see this, a program by Rough Crossings by Simon Sharma. It's a docudrama, well worth watching. So John was, they saw he was still alive, put him back in his cabin. Storm arose a couple of days later. Captain Coffin went to check how John was, and also checked the structure of the ship. Found John had fallen off his cabin, was being tossed back and forth by the movement of the ship, all covered in bruises and blood and so on. Got him back onto the bed, got him comfortable, and then Captain Coffin, interesting name, caught the fever and died. So John couldn't administer Captain Coffin's burial at sea, but he was brought back on board on the top of up onto up on deck a week or two later, to travel from ship to ship to show he was still alive. And to the black crew, the 1,190 people, not crew, the passengers, this was a miracle. Their leader had recovered from death. So absolutely overjoyed and so pleased for the future when they sailed into Sierra Leone. And they got in March, and immediately John found letters, a pile of letters for him, including the new regulations on the colony, which said that he must charge rent, which I think he just chose to ignore. He also found that instead of just dropping these people off, there was a letter saying, could he be superintendent? Because the person they had hired had taken one look at the project and that the amount of help they would get with the project, and thought, no, I'm not touching this, and left and just gone off with another failed project elsewhere. So John was asked to be superintendent of the colony, and and not go home. So he thought, well, I've come this far, I'll stay on. So he stayed, and then the rains arrived. He also had to deal with the fact that when they came from Nova Scotia to Sierra Leone, a ship had also left London, complete with a whole load of company employees called the Council, all of which had a say in the running of the colony, all of which wore their uniforms with pride, and many of which felt it was their duty to oversee the supplies and who got what in the way of rations and so on. Much to John's disgust, as superintendent, he was not in charge. He had a casting vote. That was it. So John was having to deal with this and having to deal with the fact the rains came. So they couldn't build the shelters that they'd planned. He'd also asked for the things that he knew they would need, which would be wood, would be tools, would be the infrastructure things. And what he'd actually been sent was a lot of items to help cultivate sugar and process sugar. And I think looking at this, the reason for that was sugar was very much in the news back in England. People were boycotting West Indian sugar, trying to buy East Indian sugar instead. And I think the Sierra Leone company thought, if we can make sugar, grow sugar in Sierra Leone, we can compete with the West Indies and make a big profit. So ignoring John's request, they sent all of this sugar boiling pans, machines, and so on. And also for cotton, producing cotton as well was another priority. He would say that they should be looking after the interests of the settlers, helping them settle in to this new environment. And they found, most of the food went spoiled really, really quickly. It was crazy. The wife of a chap that was down there, he was a ship surgeon, but he'd for some reason been hired as the agent for the colony. She described how there were 800 new settlers that were ill, and all the medical staff were ill, and people were dying, 5, 6, 7 people a day, and were buried in the same kind of way as dogs or cats would be. And they eventually got through this. There was some problem because Thomas Peters had also been sidelined in the organisation, and he wasn't happy about this. They also found their land had been reduced in size, what they'd been promised, and they hadn't had their elections of who could speak up for them. Well, as it was, John couldn't even speak up. He had to be beholden to this council of employees, of which I think a number, I don't know the stats, probably a few of them had died due to this, the rainy season and malaria. And so after a while, they did manage to settle down. John wrote to England and managed to get the authority to make decisions. The council were dismissed. As I said, I don't know how many were left, but he was told he would have to work, this is by the end of August, alongside 2 assistants, 2 councillors, and they were going to be a chap called Zachary Macaulay and William Dawes. They were on their way out, he was told. So, but he was in charge. So for a short while, he was in charge of the whole colony, able to make decisions, able to sort out any problems as they arose. And then Dawes arrived. Falconbridge was going to be delayed a little bit, and he took an instant liking to William Dawes, who had actually just come from Botany Bay via London and was a naval officer, so they probably had something in common there. He'd also, seemed to have that kind of bearing, that authority. So John thought, this is brilliant. I can leave Dawes in charge and I can go home and get married. Because bear in mind, he had a fiance back in East Anglia waiting for him. And so, he persuaded the people to accept Dawes as the second in command while he popped home, he said. That was what he told the people. After allocating the land, they'd gone out, they'd measured out plots of land, 5 acres each, and given papers to say this. So he went home at Christmas of 1792. unbeknownst to him, the newspapers in Britain had said that that Dawes, that was going out to the new colony, would be the lieutenant governor as well as civil engineer. I think if John had known that, that's not in the history books, but that's in the newspapers, he might have realised that when he got home, he would find out that whilst they were pleased to see him in person, publicly they weren't, because he hadn't been charging rent. He hadn't been growing sugar or cotton. He'd been basically looking after the people and settling them into this new environment. They'd come from Nova Scotia and before that from America. And that was his priority. And he had told the people that he believed he would be back because he couldn't think of anything that was more worthwhile to do. But when he got to London, they thought he must be unwell because he told them what he thought of them, the London-based Sierra Leone company. And, you know, they didn't like this young man speaking his mind at all. So he was told to take a couple of months to recover, get his strength back, and then they talked to him. And at the end of it, he was asked to resign. He refused, so instead they dismissed him. By this time, Zachary Macaulay had also arrived in Sierra Leone 10 days after John left, and Zachary proved to be a very hard taskmaster. John Clarkson had accepted the Methodism of the people that they gained either in the Americas or in American states or in Nova Scotia. They were devout Methodists in a way that Zachary Macaulay found quite offensive. They had direct communication with God. They liked to make a noise. Their preachers were loud and garish, and it was a lot of singing and possibly dancing, but lots of loud noise. And Zachary Macaulay's belief in religion should be quiet and listen to the preacher, and behave in a quiet, godly way, which we will come on to. But anyway, John got home, he got married, and a few months after we married, and he had no job. So he had to go and live with his mum for a while in Wisbech. But he was getting letters back and forth from Sierra Leone from people complaining about the new regime. And that was challenging for him, particularly the following year when some of them came back and said, can we see what we'd agreed to here? Because it doesn't seem what you said and what the Sierra Leone company and Macaulay and Dawes are saying are two different things, and they're saying you were drunk when you told us these things. And he assured them that he hadn't been drunk. He wasn't allowed to actually see them because the Sierra Leone company wouldn't say where he lived, so he was corresponding with them. I don't think he actually got to see them, but you know, I'm still looking for that one. But these delegates, these two preacher delegates that come to London, were kept waiting for months and months. They were running out of money. They were told, they asked for expenses, and they were told, well, you could get a job in London, you know, or you can mortgage the land that you were given in Sierra Leone. They refused to do either. I think that perhaps they put the hat round. But after a good few months of waiting, they were told, well, we'll give you a reply if you go back to Sierra Leone. Free passage on the next ship, which happened to be the beginning of 1793. They got the ship back to Sierra Leone, found there was no response. All their requests totally ignored. And they had to knuckle down and do what Zachary Macaulay told them to do. And Zachary Macaulay also told them they couldn't have their black preachers carrying out their marriage ceremonies. Their children had to go to Anglican catechism classes before they could go to the company school. They also had a slave ship purchased and put into the river nearby, and they were told if they didn't behave, they'd be on that ship and taken back to either Nova Scotia or to America. So not, as you would expect, by 1800, relations had really broken down. There was a new governor in Sierra Leone, but he was of the same stock as the others, Thomas Ludlam, who it said had actually allowed 2 American ships to sell enslaved Africans in Sierra Leone, 2 occasions. And it was meant to be a province of freedom set up by Granville Sharp initially. But Ludlam had a major rebellion on his hands, with the people saying they want to know where they stand on the view of land, they don't want to pay rent. But it just so happened that the British had a little ace up their sleeve, in as much as they'd managed to trick some of the Maroons in Jamaica into surrendering, and had managed to ship them to Nova Scotia, where it's bad enough coming from America to Nova Scotia, but coming from Jamaica to live in Nova Scotia, I should think must be absolutely appalling. So these 500 black, formerly free people wanted to go to Sierra Leone. The British said, come on the ship, we'll give you land if you go to Nova Scotia. They just turned up just in time for the rebellion. And as Henry Thornton, chair of the Sierra Leone Company, later said, we let them stretch their legs a little bit. In return for capturing the rebels, of which there were quite a few killed. 6 of the rebels were sent to a slave fort, which is tantamount to being killed. 24 were banished from the colony. And one of the ones who'd actually been one of the ones going to London, he was hanged publicly for his role in it. The Maroons were given the land and the property that was seized as their reward for what they'd done. They later actually communicated with John Clarkson to say that they were being mistreated in Sierra Leone as well. Yeah, he was the place you wrote to if you had grievances. He couldn't actually help, but he did listen. So am I okay talking a little bit longer? I'm nearly there. We're on to the final 2 parts. 1807, abolition of slave trade. Sierra Leone declared to be the place where any slave ships that were going across the Atlantic would be seized by the Royal Navy, taken to Sierra Leone, and the captives freed, supposedly. This wasn't actually what happened. What actually happened was that these people, that they'd been freed, supposedly, but they needed to pay, the Royal Navy had to free them. There's expenses incurred by the Royal Navy. Plus there was an incentive for the captains of the ships. For each ship they captured, they would get head money. They'd get money for each of these people that was on it as of the enslaved Africans. So you had this court of vice admiralty set up, and what they did was they weren't really that interested in the enslaved that they were taking off the ships. And what they would do with them was pass them on to Sierra Leone, often white people, sometimes black people. For a fee, they would be apprenticed for up to 14 years. They would have to work for the same one person, the person who bought them, unless he sold that apprenticeship onwards. And the person who was at that time the governor, he was appalled at this, Thomas Perrineau Thompson, absolutely appalled, because he said, this is supposed to be a province of freedom, and now we've got slavery by another name. He was also appalled at the fact that the ships were impounded and they were sold at auction, often to slave traders. Yeah, to recoup the money of that the Navy had, Navy needed paying because they got money per each person that they'd freed. And this Vice Admiralty Court, led by Zachary Macaulay, who had been the former governor, and with his relatives and other positions in the business, he was actually the agent for doing this, as well as, some of his members of the family, judge and jury, effectively. So it was a monopoly. Zachary Macaulay had also managed to get a trading monopoly in Sierra Leone as well, whereby his company was actually getting the supplies to sell to local people, William Dawes had started this process way back by actually even going out, watering down the rum and selling it at full price, and collecting in local produce that was freely growing locally and selling it at a markup in his shop. But yeah, the Macaulays owned the company business by then. And also the business had changed from Sierra Leone Company to the African Institution, a non-trading entity that was actively encouraging the Babington and Macaulay trading empire. So, but yeah, lots of conflicts of interest, isn't there always? So we had Thomas Perrineau Thompson got absolutely sick of it and complained and was dismissed. Shortly after this, we have one more attempt at trying to trade legally in the period that I've researched with Paul Cuffey, a free Quaker businessman, black man from America. And he wanted to make Sierra Leone a good trading post to trade with Britain. So he would have a triangle going the other way with American produce to Sierra Leone or to London, and buying African produce and trading back and forth. Went to Sierra Leone, got a good relationship going with them, came to London, had a good relationship with the African Institution, and asked could they help him get an import license. But the trouble was, when he got back to Sierra Leone, he bought a base, house to use as a base, but the war restarted between America and Britain, and he had to put things on hold for a couple of years. By the time he'd restarted, the British abolitionists, Thomas Clarkson and John Clarkson, had set up a project called the, it's got a long name, isn't it? The Society for the Purpose of Encouraging the Black Settlers at Sierra Leone and the natives of Africa generally in the cultivation of the soil and the sale of their produce. So this project, with Thomas Clarkson as chairman, John Clarkson helping with it, a subscription project, floundered, partly because they couldn't compete with the Macaulay empire. They didn't get any subsidies. And then Paul Cuffey died relatively young. He was the driving force behind it. So it floundered. Yeah, they also couldn't get the marketing done. And so on. And alongside this, we had a major inquiry into the actions of the African Institution over this issue of the courts and the enslaving or apprenticeship of people and so on. So various people testified, including John Clarkson, and the chair of it was Henry Bowen, an MP and abolitionist friend of William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce has always been key in this. He was there on the Sierra Leone Company, and also Macaulay was involved in not just answering questions, but also on the committee to judge it. And not surprisingly, as often happens, the African Institution investigated the actions of itself and of the Sierra Leone Company and found no wrongdoings whatsoever. So John Clarkson had he'd retired into relative obscurity, apart from setting up the London Peace Society along with his brother, because they were both very anti-war. And then we had, just to finish off, we had the Act to abolish slavery, and that eventually was passed. Before that, we had John Clarkson actually passed away, and on the morning before he passed away, he'd been reading the Anti-Slavery Reporter, and he'd said to his children, by then sort of adults, I think, but isn't it a shame that my brother's been working on this for 30 or 40 years and we've still got this problem? And then he said, I can't bear to hear anymore. And so he laid down. He was a cheery chappie mostly, but it was interesting. His last bit of reading was the Anti-Slavery Reporter, and getting depressed about it. But he passed away. But as I would sort of point out, the slavery is still with us. Slavery is still there, still worldwide, still a major problem. even though these people worked tirelessly. Thomas Clarkson until he was 86 years of age on this. But one thing I think they probably learned was that it's quite hard to be working on things down in Africa when you're in England. You've never actually, well, John had visited, he'd lived there obviously, but Thomas never got to Africa. And yet he would speak about trading with the African people. I haven't been to Africa either. I would love to go. And just as a freelance historian, yeah, the budget doesn't quite allow it. But anyway, so that's a potted. Oh, and Laudo Equiano sadly died in 1797, so well before abolition, or 10 years before abolition of the slave trade. But his book was a bestseller. His book, The Interesting Narrative About His Life, sold worldwide. It was translated into many languages and is still in print. He left 2 daughters, one of which died not long after him, and the other one went on to marry, but she never had any children. We don't know where Equiano is buried. I'm sure there's historians in London working like crazy to try and find out where. When we do, I'm sure, you know, it will be worldwide, that information and the blue plaque and so on, because he was one of those early people that was saying, this happened to me, or people I know, and, you know, it's wrong. He toured, even on his honeymoon, he married Susanna Cullum from Soham. And after 8 to 10 days of comfort, as he called it, he took his wife to Scotland on a book tour. They went to Paisley, Glasgow and Edinburgh before coming back to Soham. And then, yeah, she had the 2 daughters. But such was his dedication that his honeymoon was effectively spent on a book tour. And yeah, and they would have they were definitely aware of each other, Equiano and Thomas Clarkson.
Thank you, Maureen.
Right.
That is such, yeah, that was a tour de force, you know, to squeeze all that history into 50 minutes. I think a round of applause. Now,
I was trying to get into 45.
yeah. I'll try and find something really complicated to give you next time. But Yusufu,
Yes.
do you want to come in on that? And how much resonated and how much, you know, I mean, just...
Mano, river mano, me no sabi swim water they carry me go. Mano, me no sabi swim water they carry me go. Sewa, river sewa, me no sabi swim water they carry me go. Sewa, me no sabi swim water they carry me go. I want to start this one with a song like this. It goes like this. Till Britain shall triumph, their ships plow to sea. They stand and be justice, they watch what be free. Then cheer up, my lads, with one heart let us sing. As soldiers, as sailors, as statesmen and king. Hearts of oak, our ships, hearts of oak, our men. We always are ready, steady, boys, steady. We'll fight and we'll conquer again and again. Well, I'm choosing to start this way because Sierra Leone's history is so linked and tied to British history. Probably, we have Nigeria, we've got Gambia, Ghana, that were all part of the British colony. But I think that Sierra Leone probably has more depth in the relationship, historical relationship with Britain than probably Nigeria or Ghana or even Gambia. For a start, Sierra Leone was the first place that that Britain established the university, a Western-based university in West Africa. Sierra Leone was the first country, that is, if not even the whole of Africa itself, but at least Sierra Leone had that. And the university became known as Furabe College, which still stands up till today. So the relationship is still very strong. But I also, and you mentioned Governor Clarkson. Now in Sierra Leone, Clarkson is actually, he is actually a really, like a hero for us. Because we always say there's a prayer that Governor Clarkson, made or wrote and left for Sierra Leone, that if anybody was to harm Sierra Leone or to do anything bad against Sierra Leonean, and that person more or less like will be cursed. So
yeah, I forgot to mention, because I was rushing through, I should have mentioned that. That's his gift to the colony before he left.
Yes.
He left them the prayer.
That's correct.
Yeah, and I meant to say on his deathbed that we still know that people.
Yes.
That prayer.
Yes, and yes, that's really cool. Definitely, because I know a lot of people actually in Sierra Leone are very fond of that, and we really, in fact, when it comes to those of us who are like I don't know if I should say rebels, but those of us who speak in terms of civil rights, against corrupt ministers or presidents and so on, we always mention that one day the Governor Clarkson prayer will catch you, will deal with you. So we say, so we have all these kind of memories, and where I trained where I started my training as an actor is actually down the steps where the slaves were taken from and shipped off. What in Ghana they'll call the point of no return, and we call it waterfront today. But the steps are still there, and down there the building is still there that used to hold the slaves before they were shipped off. That space was where I started my theater training, and I started with a theater company called Tabule Theater. It was directed by a wonderful man called Dele Charlie, who's now late, and then Dennis Nelson Streeter, Raymond de Souza George, and all these wonderful people who sort of like groomed me and many of us down that space. So every evening when I finished secondary school at St. Edward's, I'll go straight down to waterfront at Barry, that's what we call it, climb down those steps and go down there. And it was like going back in time, with the sea, the sea literally crashing on the rocks, and we'll be down there playing drums and singing and coming up with stories, and doing plays like Makuba, which is Macbeth. And we adapted it all to Creole, and Merchant of Venice, which we call one pound flesh. That's what we call it, 1 pound flesh. That's what we called it. And down there was where my magic for theater kind of like really got ignited, and I learned a lot about myself at that time. Now, it's there's so many things you mentioned in your story which has influenced my work, but which I do question today. The school I went to in Sierra Leone, the secondary school I went to, at least even apart from the primary, the secondary school is called Prince of Wales. You couldn't get more posher than that. Now, Prince of Wales was affiliated with the University of Durham here. And it was meant to be the school to produce the engineers and the doctors and the politicians and so on. Of course, we had the Sierra Leone Grammar School, which was another like that. Then Annie Walsh Memorial. Then there was the Boys High School. So many schools like these were around, and CKC, Christ the King College, which was also again all by British people that set these schools up. Now, you mentioned things about land, which is very interesting as well, and I'll get to that as well. But let me just, if you don't mind, I just go through the story with the schools. Prince of Wales had all our books, our blazer, our bow tie that we wore, and the neckties and everything was imported from England. I mean, that's how posh we were. We ain't gonna touch anything native. Nothing native. You've got to, and when you get to Prince of Wales, you learned not just English, but you learned amo, amas, amat, amabam, amabas, amabat, amabamus, amabatis, amabant. You learned Latin. So you learn to conjugate in Latin. I remember the book we had in Latin called is it my book to Latin, something like that. So you got to learn these things. But everything in that school was designed to produce a workforce to serve the colonial administration. And there was no two ways about that. Whether it was Prince of Wales, whether it was St. Joseph Convent, whether it is St. Edward Secondary or so on, it was to produce people like this. So our language was totally prohibited. We would not go in there and speak your own languages. And of course, my dad saw that that's the best way to get civilized. And so he himself prohibited me from speaking my own language. Now, today, when I look back at that, I begin to see why Sierra Leone is in the challenging situation that it is today. And I'll explain. Let me explain that a little bit. Is that okay? Is that okay, John?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. Yeah, you did make me just interject there. I didn't mention that Zachary Macaulay at one point bought a whole shipload of young children back to England to be educated in Clapham under what later became known as the Clapham Sect. And they were to be Christianized and taught good English and then sort of taken back.
Now,
and some of them did go back, some died of disease, illness when they got here.
Now, the interesting thing in examining history now, with hindsight, when we begin to examine it, one of the reasons of the war in Sierra Leone was put down to injustice, period, injustice. Okay. Now, myself and a few colleagues of mine, we started digging further. Where does this come from? Why do we have this kind of issue and have gone through 11 years of war and butchered so many people? Injustice. Now, if I flip it back all the way to the years of Baibure, you probably, of course, you know about the hot tax war with Baibure in 1898. Not
terribly much. No, it's a bit later than my period, but
no, it's all right. Okay, no problem.
I could go and look it up afterwards.
It is a very interesting one. I mean, there is over 1,000 pages of Baibure documented at the parliamentary archives on Baibure and the war he fought. Now, the war was triggered because of taxes. So when you talked about paying rent and stuff like that, I saw the whole issue. Baibure started a whole dispute with the British colony at the time and says, look here. And he used to work with them. He used to work with them and supported them in abolishing the slave trade. Now, he ruled a place called Kase, which is slightly up in the north. And he was a Timini ruler. but also an astute, very, very sharp, intelligent scribe and a military strategist as well. But when he approached the British leaders and says, look, we've fine, you can do what you're doing in Freetown, but don't come and tell us to pay taxes or rent for our own houses that we have built in our own places here. Because the British went and put what is called the hot tax, like we have council tax, or what Thatcher called poll tax. When they introduced it, Baibure says, look, this is not going to happen here. And the British were even also taking the local domestic cases and bringing it down to the courts in Freetown. And Baibure says, I am the chief in this place. How can you take the cases in my own place and you say you want to go and judge it in your own place? This is not right. And there's even a letter he wrote specifically on this to the British, which is still documented at the parliamentary archives. Baibure says, no, look, we're not going to do this. We're not going to take this kind of thing. If you want taxes, it's for your people in Freetown. God bless you. But us here, these are our own houses. We have built them. We don't see no reason to pay any taxes to you. Of course, the British would not hear it. And it is crazy if you read some of the remarks that the British governors at that time wrote about these native Sierra Leoneans who are just rebellious and would not obey orders. And so Baibure got together. He rallied quite a number of the people in the south among the Mendes and the Timinis up in the north, brought them together, and it became a war, what became known as the Hot Tax War of 1898. It was a crazy war. I mean, they ran rings around the British Army at the time because they understood the jungle and the jungle warfare. But eventually, the British Army went on what they call like an operation annihilate anything you can get, basically. So they started burning all the places where the people would have harvested and kept their rice. They would burn everything down, literally wiped out villages. And that was what triggered Baibure to actually surrender himself. In a way to say, instead of his people suffering, he will give himself up, which he did. And he was arrested and exiled to the Gold Coast then, or what was called the Gold Coast in Ghana. And 70 of the men that fought with him were all publicly hanged.
Oh.
Now, I mean, now what now comes to my mind in that when we're talking of land is the African mentality of what land is, the relationship to land versus the shall I say Britain at that time, or the Western world coming and their own relationship with land. Land for here in the West, as you all know, is about ownership. I own this land. Well, for Britain, the Queen owns the land, and you and I were just renting it. Whereas back there, the attitude to land was all of us have it. It is in abundance. And there is none of this attachment to it at all, and it serves everybody. So, when even you talk of King Jimmy, now that's an interesting question I want to ask: whether you know, or if there's any document at all of what was his real name. He definitely was not called Jimmy.
No.
Yes, I'm saying. I just wonder. You know, it's a question.
Yeah, I have got it written somewhere, but I've got a lot of books on the shelf.
No problem.
It's similar to Jimmy, but spelled in a completely
because it's the same with the other king that they met there afterwards, Naimbana.
Yes, yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So Naimbana, his name was just actually Bana. King or Bana, that was his name. But it said that when the British went and they said to him, "What's your name?" He just go Naim Bana.
Name.
So he became, everybody called him now Naim Bana. But
Yes.
that his Timini name was actually Bana. Okay. Now, but so I'm interested in something like that. But the relationship that Britain and the resettled Africans, what they brought to Sierra Leone, according to, at least from what we're looking at, triggered a nation of people that, and I use that word here, nation, but let me say a people that have not up till now seen themselves as a nation. Sierra Leoneans have not seen themselves truly as a nation up till now. Sierra Leoneans see themselves as the Mende, the Limbas, and the Timini, and all these different sects, but not necessarily as a nation. And we're still not functioning as a nation. Now, those resettlers that were brought in, or those Africans that were brought in to settle, many of them came in, and because they were, the land had been bought for them in that area that we call Freetown, it meant that none of them were allowed to own land up in the provinces outside of that Freetown. And that still stands up till today. We call them the Creoles now. So no Creole can actually go and own land up country. And today, some of the Creoles are protesting. They are protesting because they're putting complaints to say, look, they are also Sierra Leoneans and they should be able to get land up country. Those people up country are also saying, no, they would not necessarily want the Creoles to come in to own land because for them, as I say, their own attitude towards land, it's not this, give me all the documents and paperwork and they write all this wonderful English. It's not our way of looking at land. Our way of looking at this, you are our child. Okay, now from here to over there, that is your land. You take that one where the tree is growing there, and that's it. It's signed, sealed, and done. You build there and do whatever you want. But so we still have I don't know if I call it a two-tier system, but it's like a two different systems running in Freetown and what's running up country. So when the war ignited, it ignited because the deep roots that we don't see ourselves as a nation meant we do not treat each other with justice. We treat each other in a way where, for example, when the British came, they took the Creoles or those resettlers as better than the native people. And so the schools they opened, whether Prince, even me, my name is Yusufu Jallo. Now, a Jallo is not supposed to be going to Prince of Wales. It should be a Mariella Smith, Carolina Thomas. Those are names that should be going to Prince of Wales and not a Yusufu Jallo, who's a Fuller man. And the Fullers in Sierra Leone were considered one of the lowest of the low people. So to be finding myself there, I am definitely like a very lucky person to be going there. But I'm just saying that was the attitude then. The Creoles saw themselves as English, that they were the proteges for England, they were the pinnacle for civilization in Africa and in Sierra Leone, and they are there to civilize all these natives. And they would even go and take the native people, the Limbas and the Locos, to work for them as servants. So now what are we seeing here? We're seeing exactly what the British did to them. They are also coming back home and doing it to their own people. That was the kind of system. So it's never became a system where we can say, look, let us all do things equitably. But everything that was about dominating somebody got adopted, and the justice system became the same. So if you do not have a name or something, you are trodden upon and you're nothing. Now, when independence came, it exploded. And eventually, of course, so much injustices, which eventually led to the war that we have now in Sierra Leone. I also want to point out something you talked about the it's gone off my head right now, but anyway, I want to share a story. Can I share a story?
Of course.
All right. This is a story which I have not told it for it's a very significant story. It was told to me by a Fuller man. there was an old man who he had 3 sons. And his 3 sons, the eldest was called Demba, and the middle was called Samba, and the youngest was called Sammadi. And these 3 sons, they worked for their dad, and their dad was very, very wealthy. He was such a wealthy man. I mean, gold, money, cattle, everything he had. He had a beautiful wife, and his wife was called Zahra Afsa. She was such a beautiful woman. And every day, Zahra, she will cook for her husband. She will cook some lovely, delicious couscous. She will make some delicious cassava and yam. She will make sure the chicken is halal. But I tell you something, she raised her sons wonderfully with respect. But as this man was getting older, he thought, you know, I need to call my sons together so I can pass on their inheritance to them, because I don't want to die without them knowing what they've inherited from me. And so the old man, he called his 3 sons with his beautiful wife Zahra sitting next to him. And he asked his sons to bring 3 calabashes. In those calabashes, in my language, we call them horde. And the horde, each of the sons brought the horde, and he told the sons to go away, and he will call them after he had put all their inheritances inside their hordes each. And so the sons went away, and he sat next to his wife. And with the eldest son's horde, he put inside a lot of dirt, mud, sand, gravel, you name the dirt, all sorts of dirt, he put it inside and he locked it tight. And his wife is looking at him wondering, oh, what is my husband doing? And the second horde, for the second son, Samba, he put a lot of gold and diamond and silver, and you name all the minerals, he put them all inside there. And he closed it again tight. And then the last son, Sammadi. And for Sammadi, he put a lot of money. I mean, you name the currency, it was inside that horde. Yen, dollar, pound sterling. I mean, everything was inside the horde. He locked it tight. And he called his sons again and he said to them, here. He gave the eldest his own, he gave the middle his own, he gave the youngest somebody his own. And he told them not to open the horde until after he had died. And all the funeral ceremonies had happened. Then they would open their hordes for them to see all that they have inherited from him. Oh, Zahra, look where you find no Zahra. Look where you sweet, Zahra. Oh, I go die for you, oh, Zahra. Crazy for you, oh, Zahra. Oh, Zahra. And this old man, as he sang for his beautiful wife, he passed away. Well, as he passed away, the sons came and everybody gathered and they did the funeral. They did the funeral, and after the funeral was all over, the sons were now excited to open the holiday to see what Papa has left for them. The old man is gone. It is now time for us, the young ones, to take over. And they says, Mama Zara, don't worry, we will look after you. And so they came. As is the custom, it's the eldest son who is supposed to open his own holiday first. So they thought, you know what? You, the eldest son, Demba, open yours and we will come to ours. And Demba, with excitement, being the eldest son, I mean, the dad was wealthy, so he's the eldest son. He opened his horde. When he looked inside the horde, he almost collapsed with heart attack when he saw it was full of dirt, full of sand, full of, hey, what is this? Why did you mean I worked all these years? What my dad left for me is just dirt and filth? Well, so the other two brothers are now thinking, this is, what is this now? If dad has left dirt for the oldest son, I wonder what is left for us. So Samba, the second son, he opened his own. When he opened his orde and he saw the gold and the diamond and everything, hey, but no, this is strange. I'm the second son. How come I've been left with this, but my older brother has got dirt? This is, so he couldn't rejoice. It was too disturbing. Then they're now looking forward to the youngest son, Samadi. And somebody opened his own. When he looked in, when he saw the money, when he saw the currency, hey, he's now thinking, yeah, what is it going to be? Is it a BMW or is it a Bentley? Which one is it now? I'm not even sure. Is it Mallorca or is it Spain? Where am I going to go for holiday? But he himself, he had to hold himself and think, no, we have to figure out what this is. And so they thought, we don't understand what this is at all. You know something? Because this is strange. We don't understand why our dad has done this. You know what? We must go to Grandma Jan Williams. Let us go and find out from Grandma Jan Williams. She probably will be able to help us, and go to, to Uncle John Rowe. He might also understand how to interpret what this is. We don't understand. This is against the custom. So they went to Grandma Jan. And Grandma Jan, she looked at it and she says, you know something? This one I don't understand. I've done my best. I've done everything to try to figure out how this is sorted out. But you know what? I think it is best if you go to Uncle Colin Owen. If you go to Colin Owen, he might probably know. And they went to Uncle Colin Owen, and Uncle Colin, he says, you know, this kind of knowledge, your dad was a very learned man, and this one is hard for me. Let us try Sister Maureen. And they went to Sister Maureen, and Sister Maureen looked at it. Look, me, I have studied many things in my life. I've read many things, but this, it is beyond my own category of understanding. So the best thing to do, let us figure out. Let us go to, let us see, who do we go to? You know what? There is an elderly man who's same age as your dad. His name is Grandpa John Rowe. John Rowe lives in a village far away. He says if you go there, he will be able to probably tell you, because he studied just as much as your dad. And so these boys, they took off on a journey. As they carried on the journey, sorry if you're hearing bang, 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 it is the, how you call it now, the people are still carrying on with the bonfire night around my house. So it's making a lot of noise, okay? That's what you're hearing, bang, 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 okay? So these boys took off on their journey. As they're going, they arrived, the first thing they saw on the road as they're going were two cows. The first cow looked absolutely skinny, like bony skinny, totally unwell. but around the cow was fresh grass and water, and everything was green around the grass, around this cow. But this cow was skinny and dry and unhealthy. And the boys thought, what is this? And then they saw the second cow. The second cow, hardly any grass, hardly any water, but this cow looking healthy, body was nice and fresh and looking really good. And the boys were confused. Now, what is this? We've come from one confusion. Now we're going in for another confusion. And they carried on the journey. As they carried on, they saw a baboon. And this baboon was wearing, like, you know, the hats of the professors, no, and also the turbans, or like of a learned imam, and also the neck, the collar of like a pastor, a priest, and he's holding on to a Bible, a Quran, he's holding on to books of lecturing, he's holding all of this stuff, and the baboon is sitting down there. A baboon? Since when a baboon is wearing university stuff and all these kind of, what is this? And the baboon is sitting down there. The cows, now a baboon. And they carried on. As they went on, they saw two trees. There was one bird. And this one bird, if it goes to sit and perch on top of one tree, that tree, all the leaves will fall off that tree. And when this tiny bird moves and sits on top of the other tree, all the leaves will just freshen up, and this tree will just blossom. What kind of bird is this? Sits on one tree, all the leaves fall off. Sits on the other tree, and the tree is blossoming. They are now baffled. They carried on. They met a dog. It was a female dog. And they looked at this dog, and the dog was walking, and they could hear all the little puppies going woof, 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 woof. And they looked around. They couldn't see any puppies. But actually, all the puppies inside the stomach of this dog, it was the puppies that were now shouting woof, 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 woof. Wow. What is this? This is getting more and more confusing for us. First is our father giving us all this funny, the horde and all this, messing up the whole culture. Then it was the cows. Then it was the baboon. Then the trees. Now the dog. It wasn't long that they approached the village where the great man John Rowe was. So they asked a girl, said, please, do you know where Mr. John Rowe is? Baba John Rowe. They said, Baba John Rowe, don't worry. He says, look over there. That house, you see the house? On top of the house, you see there's a red hat sitting on top of the house. That is where Baba John Rowe is sitting down. And they said, all right. And so they took off. And they followed where the red hat is. As they got there, Baba John Rowe was sitting inside his bedroom. And while he's sitting inside there, even before the boys wanted to enter the compound, he shouted, don't enter my compound. Stay right where you are there. And I want you to tell me everything you saw on the road as you were coming here. And the boys thought, well, Baba, what we saw the two cows. And he asked them, do you understand what that meant? He said, we don't. Baba John Rowe says, all right. He says, the first cow that you saw with lots of green, but the cow looked ill. He says, it's a man who has a lot of wealth. But he has not gathered his wealth properly. He has not gathered his wealth with fairness and lawfully. So every day he is worried, sick, that one day they'll catch up with him. The law will catch up with him. That is why you see that cow as skinny as that. It's the same with somebody like that. They'll always be worried and they never have a peace of mind. See, the second cow, he says he's a person who works hard by the sweat of his own brow. He may not have much, but he's got contentment of mind. So therefore, you must learn to work hard by the sweat of your brow to make sure you get contentment. Gather your wealth with justice and with fairness, and you will live well and have a healthy life. He said, what else did you see? He said, well, Baba, we saw the baboon. Do you know what it means? He says, no, we don't. He says, the baboon. He says, there are people who have learned, they've studied, they have knowledge, but they do not speak the truth to the young. He says, you must learn to teach the young properly. He says, otherwise, it's just like the baboon, it's more or less useless. They thought, wow. He said, what else did you see? He said, Baba, we saw the 2 trees and the 1 bird. He said, do you know what it means? He says, no, we don't know what it means. He says, that is a man who marries 2 wives. He says, the first wife that he goes to, all the trees fall. He says, that first wife cannot handle his jaga jaga. He says, therefore, he says, but the second wife can handle the man's jaga jaga. He says, therefore, you must learn to treat your woman with respect in terms of what they need. Don't think they all just the same. You can just treat them anyway, just not. Each one deserves her own respect and our own way of treating her. He says, yes, Baba. Say, what else did you see? Say, well, we saw the dog. He says, all right. Do you know what it means? He says, no, we don't know. He says, the dog with the puppies barking. He said, there's going to come a time when it is the young ones who are now going to be determining where the future goes. Because the older ones are no longer respecting family. They are no longer speaking truth to the young. And they are not living a happy life. So make sure you learn all these connections. He says, now you can come into my compound. And Baba John Rowe invited them. The boys went in. They sat down in front of Baba John. And he says, now what do you have? He says, you the big one, the eldest, Demba. So where you go? He says, well, me, I've got the dirt. You, I've got the diamond, the gold. You, I've got all the money. He says, now, you, the middle one, Samba. He says, where do you get your gold and dirt and gold and diamond from? He says, well, they get it from the dirt. When they dig, they get it from the soil and it comes from there. That's where I get it from. He says, all right. He says, you with your gold and with your money, somebody. He says, you can do anything with your money. He says, yes, Baba. He says, I can buy anything. He says, I can buy gold and diamond even with my money. He says, right. He says, but if the soil does not give the gold and diamond, where is your money? He says, my money is useless. He says, now, take your money, take your gold, put it together, give it to your eldest brother who has the soil. Your father gave your eldest brother the soil because it is from him that everything else comes from. It's from the soil that everything comes from. Give it back to him and he will decide what you will do with everything. And the boys learned to respect their elder brother. But more importantly, they learned to respect land. For without land, nothing else will happen. Nothing else. In fact, our very body goes right back to the soil. So that is the story that I learned from an elderly Fullerman, to respect land. So when we're talking about Sierra Leone, we're talking about Freetown. The issue, of course, is about land. It's about land. If we talk of Freetown, it's about land. The botanist who went back, who says, I have seen land, who says, I have seen land, and bring back these people. If there was no land, there's no way these African people would have been returned back to Freetown, which is what's brought us here today. Thank you. That's my story for you.
Thank you, Yusuf. Now, just now, I mean, we could start in for another 3 hours, but we can't. Are you all right, Ali, to look after us for a little while? Because I'm sure is there questions for either Yusuf or Maureen? Because we've just been a phenomenal evening. So unmute yourselves and ask questions.
Lovely stuff. Love that story, Yusufu. I don't have any questions for you. You've given us loads of stuff there, but I would like to see your drum.
Oh God! I have kind of like elected not to drum today. I said I'll just keep it quiet because. Oh, God.
You're going to hold it up for Colin. Hold it up for Colin.
Let's have a look at it.
There, the laptop was sitting on top of the drum. Is that okay, Colin? I love your accents. Oh my days. It's Scottish, am I correct?
No, it's Irish, but it's right up in the northeast coast of Ireland, which is about 14 miles from Scotland, and we often get, if we're over in England, people always get our accents mixed up with the Scottish.
All right, because I know that I went to a place called Campbelltown.
Campbelltown's about 20 miles away, just as the crow flies from where I'm sitting.
Right. Now, in Freetown, there is a place we call Campbelltown, and we have Campbell Street, actually left there by people who came from Campbelltown.
Wow.
And went. We have it all there. I mean, we've got Waterloo, we've got Regent, we've got Kent, we've got Sussex. You name the many times. We've got McDonald's. We've got they're all there. All these little towns, they're all there. You know, we've got Gloucester. All of that. In fact, where I live in Freetown is near Gloucester. We've got Leicester, which is literally behind my house, Leicester Peak, and it is where the British Army set up a base just by Leicester Peak. So all of these names are like they're there. My dad was a military police officer, and he came here to study as a military police. You know, when he was being commissioned to be a military police officer, so he came to study as well in England here.
Wow. Yeah, Maureen, you mentioned that you kept mentioning a chap there in your piece there, Macaulay.
Yes, Zachary Macaulay.
Sorry, what was his full name?
Zachary
Macaulay. See, Macaulay's a very common name where I live here. There's two big names, McAllister and Macaulay. My mother was a McAllister, and they're very common names. Half the population are either McAllisters or Macaulays, and I wondered, was there a Scottish Irish? There has to be with that chap there.
That's probably going back to front though, isn't it?
No.
Can you read that?
I can read that. Well, I'll have to
Yeah,
look
that's the chap.
He's obviously got some Scots-Irish ancestry.
Yeah, a steadfast Scot. And actually, I read this book, and it's written by somebody who's quite dry in their writing and research, Ian White of the Church, Minister of the Church of Scotland.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't come away with any different impression of Zachary Macaulay than I had before I started reading it. Normally, if you get a biography, the person cares about the person they're writing about and writes good stuff. They care, you know, there's a kind of bond between them. But it felt that this chap couldn't really get inside Zachary Macaulay and find the nice person hidden beneath.
Presbyterian Scot.
Yeah.
And Macaulay is also a very popular name in Sierra Leone. Very, very, very popular. We've got streets called Macaulay Street. It's a very popular street in Freetown if you go there.
Yeah, well, he was governor of quite a few times and also secretary to the African Institution. So he was quite an important person, if a bit stubborn in his viewpoints.
That's a very polite way of putting it, Maureen. We're almost past the watershed, but it won't be in other parts of the world.
Wow.
Yeah, I was giving, when I was running a course on this subject, it got to the stage where I'd mentioned Zachary Macaulay. We don't like him, do we? The students would say.
But I think I mean I am fascinated with this history, especially the British history with Sierra Leone, because I think within that history lies a lot of the solutions to the challenges that Sierra Leone faces. In the sense that we have a saying, we say in Creole, we say, know yourself not to cause, now good advice. To know yourself is not an insult, it's good advice. And what I know, at least of Sierra Leone and of Freetown specifically, is that we've just gone through a whole thing where it's all about denying who you are, whether it is becoming a Christian or becoming Muslim, or your names being changed. Everything that we held indigenously sacred was, pushed to one side, and schools, of course, not speaking our languages and so on. And I think that history affects us in a way where we are not able to see the value and the grandeur within. Everything that is grandeur is seen from without. So when we have our university, we have not had the leaders in Sierra Leone yet who have had the vision to say, you want to become a doctor, great, we'll build it right here in Sierra Leone. But instead, the trajectory has been, let's go England, or let's go America, or let's go Europe straight away. And that is all coming from the history that we've just looked at here. And I think the more we examine this story, I think that the more I would say Sierra Leoneans would find themselves probably in a much better place when they really critically examine what has been done in terms of the psyche. There are Sierra Leoneans today that still call out to say, well, it's better, let's go back to the British people coming and colonizing us, because it seems like we can't seem to fix the country. And people do cry out like that still. To me, it's horror. What it just shows is that, my God, we really probably were not ready for the system that has been left, whether it was the railway that was totally scrapped, or that it was just running systems there. These were systems that we were not necessarily prepared for well. Now we have indigenous systems that we ran for many, many, many years, and they carried on. But now to handle the British system, which was based on a language that you had to spend so many years to learn, there is definitely no way that that people will make it through. And especially when you have the few who had gone to study, when they came back, they came with an attitude of the Lord and Master over the servant, exposed to enormous financial resources, and again a lot of layers of corruptions that went on. Forget it. They just ransackled the whole place. And so it's like revisiting these stories again and beginning to understand the diagnosis of understanding who we are, the value that we do have, and that we deserve to be better, and we can be better. And it's just that there is a period of time where the stories were a little bit wonky, if I may put it that way. And we got to confront that. I call it, confront our darkness, if you like. But within that darkness, there is enormous amount of light. And that darkness for me goes all the way back to slavery, back into colonialism and all that, and examining that, looking deeply into it, and understanding that you know, this is not impossible. We just got to know that this is what has happened, and let us look at the story maybe slightly differently.
Well, a lot has happened. Huge things have happened in such a very short time. You know, you're only talking a couple of 100 years. It's nothing in the history of a country and a people, and it'll take a very long time for people to be able to become comfortable with that and comfortable with looking at themselves. And I mean, it's an ongoing process. Every nation goes through it. I guess it's Ireland is still going through it and getting more and more comfortable with themselves, and more comfortable with their history, and more comfortable with their nearest neighbours with whom they had such difficulties for such a long time. It's just a very, very long process. It's not geological, but it's getting there.
You're right. I mean, even having this thing here, this talk here, for me personally, it is. I see as a storyteller, what we do, even as a historian as well, it's like we take the jumbled up narrative in the head and we try to straighten it out so we can actually see the beginning, the middle, and the end, and make sense of it. And this is what we're doing as storytellers. Some of the work I'm doing with Sierra Leoneans specifically is getting them to face some of these things. Now, it is highly uncomfortable because when I put my stories to Sierra Leoneans, sometimes, I really get people who look at me like, how can you say that? Especially if I bring in anything like our indigenous culture, which from a Christian point of view or Muslim is seen like evil and terrible and, so on. But let me take the witch, to say somebody is a witch, for example. You all know the history of witches in terms of the West. I mean, burned them to the stake and so on and so forth. But who were they? Who were these witches? Why was it just witches and not wizards? You understand? But when I look at it, I begin to see that the idea was that any woman who shows any knowledge other than giving birth to a child and cooking seems to be, a witch. But when we check further, we'll realize that women are incredibly sensitive spiritually and have a high sense of relationship between themselves and the natural surroundings. So what we find generally is that what we say medicine women, I don't know what's the terminology I'll use here, but the women knows herbs. They are connected to know how to give medicines here and there and so on. So back home, the most powerful people who would give you or heal you were women. Those who would always be around the kings at that time were also the women. So they were incredibly powerful. But as we call them now witches and all this stuff, it means we're cutting off from a very important source that is a guide for us. I mean, women lay their life on the line to give life. I mean, if you're not sensitive enough, then they will never be sensitive again. So I think that when I talk about this now to my own people and begin to bring on some of the practices that we had before, I mean, oh Lord, they come with thunder and brimstone on me. But but I strongly believe it's about, let's go back in there and check right in there and understand what we had strong before. And I think our women, incredibly, incredibly strong. And an important part of the survival of our peace or our nature, Mother Earth, if we want to call it that way as well. And what is appearing now from what I'm finding out is that the way we are treating, or we have been treating our women, is the same way we are treating the earth. That which gives us a source of life and sustenance. Us, I dare say, the male species of things, or the male energy, is that we're just jumping everywhere. But it's like we're little children that are just bouncing around with excitement, where this older being that's been there as the source is calm. She settles. And we're everywhere. Like we want to climb Mount Everest. We want to do this, want to do that. But these are the kind of things I try to bring to my own people in examining the relationship between us, gender-wise, especially those who are looking at feminism in Sierra Leone at the moment, and they're looking at the Bondo society, the what they refer to as the female genital mutilation thing. So all those things I'm discussing with them and trying to look at it slightly differently. But my God, it is quite challenging. But I'm pushing that no, we have to look at these things properly and not throw away the baby with the bathwater.
Somewhere in the research for this, because this goes on years, this research, there was a mention, I'm pretty certain, of the early settlers there was a wise woman that came to help them with some of the health issues. I'm pretty certain, I think it might be in Anna Maria Falconbridge's account of her experience.
I won't
definitely there was a woman who gave a lot of the knowledge of the medicines of that area that grow naturally, because our cures for the illnesses are
and it's
local.
It's still on today. It's still on today. You understand? And my grandmother was what you call a sowe. She understood herbs. My auntie, who my grandmother passed all the knowledge to, she's also another sowe as well. And I've got another auntie as well who's slightly older, who has even more knowledge. But they're there, and they have all of this knowledge of herbs and medicine. Now, with the new system now of going to stop this, or going to stop that, and because every girls needs to go to school, or they need to this, that, and the other, they are losing much of these values. And so one of the organizations I had a discussion with once on this, I asked them, well, if you are going to take away the women's society away, the Bondo society, what do you put in its place? Because currently what we have in the city, it's not working. It's like every man for himself, God for us all. If a woman is abused, she can't go to the police. The police are just as corrupt, if not even worse. And it's men. They can't afford to go to court. Right now, as I'm talking to you, there are serious cases of rape and abuse of women in court, and they've lost the papers. Whereas if it's up country now, in the traditional sense, no way, man. No way, Jose. That case will be sorted out one way or the other. Justice will be met, at least in their own way. And so I feel that we are caught between, if I dare say, the pretense of a colonial legacy justice system, and I say pretense definitely because the judges are so damn mixed up and corrupt and don't have a clue. And then we have a traditional system which we are not necessarily valuing. So we are now in the middle. We can't afford this expensive system, and we don't even understand it either. And then we don't value the traditional system which we had before. So where are we now? That is where I'm saying the histories need to be revisited, so that we can find where we do belong as Sierra Leoneans. And even the people who were returned back to Sierra Leone, the Creoles, now they're going through a generation now of young people now of Creoles who now do not mind dating a fuller man like me. Whereas before, that was prohibited in capital letters. Today, they're dating a fuller man like me. They will marry. So you find somebody who's called Maureen Jallo. I mean, that is just those two names, just not mad.
Actually, going back to my research, that was one of the things that was noticeable of the ones that came down to Sierra Leone from London, because it was mostly the males that ended up on the streets of London. They often got together with the white women because they were perhaps a better prospect than the poor white men on the streets of London, because they'd come all the way from America. They had potential. So that you had quite a few mixed race couples going down to Sierra Leone.
Yes.
Whereas the second wave, the ones from Nova Scotia, they tended to be actually form families amongst, just all that body of people that went from New York. It was quite different, that the way the settlement mix was.
Yes.
But also onto legal matters. There's quite a movement within this country now of people researching the old Magna Carta. In fact, there's an organisation, Magna Carta 2020, to bring back common law, where you dismiss all this complicated, got to get the wording right, reams and reams of books and so on, you've got to read, and go back to thou shalt do no harm. If you have harmed somebody or their property, you make recompense for that. If nobody is harmed, then it's not, what is the crime? Let's look at it. It's not something you go through the courts costing an absolute fortune in. And of course, the main people there's lots of stories on that, of the main people that gain from the court system are the legal profession.
Yes.
My goodness gracious me, if you two ran the world, civilization would collapse. I mean, where on earth would they get their money from?
Yes. From the tilling the soil, the man and woman of the living soil.
Okay. Look, we could carry on all. Poor Ali, down in Morocco, it's about 2 o'clock in the morning by now. No, it's not quite. It's knocking on. So it's 10 o'clock in the evening. So we've got to let Ali get at least have a cup of tea before he goes to bed. There's so I've got to thank you. A fascinating night, a really fascinating night. Power of story and history together when it comes, together is, I've been looking forward to tonight for weeks. Look forward to everything, actually. I'm looking forward to sort of a few weeks' time when Zara is on. But there's the one thing I will announce that's coming up is that we've started weekly young international tellers. And tomorrow night we've got we have children. Some children from Gaza are doing a play tomorrow. Mainly teenagers tomorrow night. And that's every Tuesday. And that's kind of hope, just to see, these young tellers from all over the world just coming in whatever circumstances they're living in. You see these youngsters with just hope and enthusiasm and just that spirit. So that's tomorrow night, 5 o'clock. That is. That's an hour earlier because of so the youngsters can get. But for now, one final round of applause for Maureen. If anyone's listening elsewhere on something else, there is a hat. It's going to Yusfu, but he'll split it up because he's a good man, and he'll drop some. You remember the third calabash? He'll put some back in the earth. So just bang it in the hat. But both freelance historians and storytellers, wherever they are, need to eat. So pop something in. And thank you for listening. It's been a really long session, but it feels like 2 minutes. I feel like I've been to the University of Life, but tonight. So
thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, one last question. Are you both on Facebook, Maureen?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't go on it that often, but I am on it. Yeah.
Track you down there. Okay. Thanks a lot.
I'm an addict.
Oh.
Yeah.
Otherwise known as the Devil's Playground.
Yeah, I know. If I put something, if I want Yusuf, if I want to remind Yusuf, I just put it on Facebook that he's on tonight. And
it's addictive.
Daniel, it's lovely to see you joining us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Goodbye, Maureen. Bye, Colin. Bye, Zara. Bye.
Right, where's he going? There we go. Leave meeting. Leave. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali,
Thanks
for bearing with us all this time.